Welcome to On Top of the Covers, a weekly podcast by Orlove, dedicated to all of the creative visionaries, entrepreneurs, artists, makers, disruptors, all of you around the world that are creating purely to create. And, you know, as we say, you're contributing to the culture of music in some way. And that's really also the goal here is we also feature inspirational stories of people contributing to that culture. Often we're examining how they do it creatively, artistically, personally, professionally, as you guys know. And we say that all the time on the show. I'm Matt Gottesman. I'm really grateful to be here with you. I'm your host, and I'm also the director of the Orlove brands. And, you know, as we note every week, we say that music is this common bond in the world, right? It's really what connects us all. And so we really had dedicated ourselves to opening up the conversations, not only about the art, but like the contributors, their missions, and documenting unconventional ways and paths to, you know, success. Success is a very arbitrary word, and it's also constantly being redefined by every individual, especially in the arts, now more than ever. And so we're really excited to be talking about all of this, and we're going to dive right in. And I've got another incredible guest today, Tristan. He's a regional manager for the Association for Electronic Music. You know, just a little bit of a background, 20 years professional experience. We started actually geeking out a little bit before the show, so I'm hoping he's going to bring up some of these things. But his experiences in business development, music recognition technology, anti-piracy, sales, events. In fact, actually it was the anti-piracy that we started talking about. Is really driven by a love of electronic music, uniting people and helping them thrive. And in 2017, he founded AFEM's Protect Mental and Physical Health for Fans and Professionals Working Group. Again, I cannot stress enough, we've had a couple of conversations about this, but mental health, especially now more than ever, very, very, very big deal, especially if you're an artist or a creator or you know, you're pushing boundaries out there. It's a journey, and the mind is one of the most important journeys, the most important journey, right? And your body. So he founded this professionals group. Today it comprises of over 80 members from every sector of the industry. And in 2019, he founded AFEM's Green Initiatives Working Group, which focuses on environmental sustainability, and sitting on the advisory boards for Brighton Music Conference, Help Musicians UK, and UK Live Music Group. And then over the years, he's been featured speaker at numerous conferences, interviewed for radio shows and podcasts, given comment in leading industry publications like the BBC, Billboard, DJ Mag, International Music Summit Ibiza, Paris Electronic Week, and Most Wanted Music Berlin. He started off his career doing club lighting in Ibiza and promoting nights in the UK. I don't think you can go wrong there. I mean, that's like the heart of like where it all where it all goes down. And today he also mentors and coaches the next generation of electronic music talent in his spare time. You guys can check him out on tristanhunt.co.uk. But we'll get into all of the areas that you can find him and reach out to him here in a little bit. But Tristan, really appreciate you being here and wanting to dive into a whole bunch of topics today. Thank you.
Oh, Matt, great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And these are some great topics. So before we start the show, for people listening, you know, we go back and forth a lot of times, and I like Tristan's ideas of, you know, some of the passionate things you want to talk about, which was mental health in the electronic music industry. And we're going to get into that. We are going to talk a little bit about the environmental sustainability. And I started throwing in there a few other things about helping artists retain more ownership and control over their work. You know, we're in a very beautiful time period for creatives. So, but first, as people know, at the beginning of each show, we do the 4 rapid fire questions. And we do that because we're not like anybody else. And we like seeing how people flow in the very beginning, you know, for the things that matter, you know, to them in these particular areas. So are you ready?
Ready.
All right, let's do it. So question number 1, if all music is gone and it's wiped from the face of the earth, but you can save only 3 albums to listen to for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm going to go Bristol because that's kind of where I'm from here in the UK. So Massive Attack, Blue Lines, absolute classic. Like it's all there. Brilliant electronica, amazing vocals, and some really chilled out melodies with something that's a bit more energetic as well. Second one, we go Left Field Leftism. Again, dance classic, massive album, and probably the third I'd go Goldie Timeless. So again, sort of a breakbeat drum and bass masterpiece, really.
Amazing. Now, question number 2 sometimes relates to number 1. depending on how you answer. But we've had quite a few people who related 1 and 2 together. But name an influential person, living or non-living. And I always remind our guests, it can be seriously anybody throughout like all of history, if you'd like, that if you could interact with for one night, who would they be?
Anyone from history.
Anybody.
I'd go Marcus Aurelius. The philosopher king from Roman times, Stoic, and a man that sort of he was a living god in his own time, but chose to put his time and energy into being the best human being that he could be. When he didn't have to, he could have sat back and done nothing, but instead he invested all of his time into this practice called Stoicism, which is a type of philosophy that really helps you to sort of grow and develop, and it's something that we can practice here today. And I just think that the man's fascinating.
That's a phenomenal choice. I could only imagine the conversations. A philosopher king. His the meditations of Marcus Aurelius are I don't know. You can get I don't know if you have the book, but they put together all of his meditations. One of the most remarkable people in history, in terms of just like pure execution in every area of his life. Period. End of story. I mean, it's like the mindset is just tapped into. Am I better than yesterday? Keep going. And it's just like, and it's in all areas of his life. So I dig that choice. Actually, that might have been one of my favorite choices I've heard so far. Don't tell our other guests.
Meditation, great book as well. I've got a very dog-eared copy.
Right. Yeah, a friend of mine gave me the book about 2 years ago, and on his recommendation, I'm like, oh, these are incredible. Okay, so question number 3. In your opinion, what's the best music-focused film for you of all time? And I always remind our guests that it can be, a documentary, a docuseries. It can be fiction. It doesn't have to be like, real, based on any true story or anything like that. It's that music is at the core of, of the movie or the film or piece.
Okay, I'm going to go for something that's pretty close to my heart, electronic music. So it's a film called Human Traffic, which is all about really club culture in the UK at a very specific time. So it was done towards the end of the 90s, and it really encapsulates the culture that I work in. So you've got like massive figureheads like Carl Cox in there doing cameo appearances, lots of publications that we're really familiar with, and lots of music that also was like the soundtrack to part of my life when I was coming up into the industry. And I think actually, even watching it now, it's pretty funny, but it's also pretty true to a lot of the culture that we're still in now, and the camaraderie and the closeness and the bonding that people have being in that space.
I was thinking about, I know I was going through your bio a little bit, and we were talking pre-show, but having that 20 plus years experience, like the 90s and the early 2000s were a very interesting time and shaper of music in a lot of different genres. So I'm going to be curious to talk to you a little bit more about that. But I just was realizing, like, when you think about the time frame, especially like that late 90s and in the 2000s, what an incredible time in music. But anyways, I don't want to digress. So the 4th question is, what's an important book, podcast, audible, platform, anything in general that you feel has really helped you navigate your creativity and passion? It could be an author in particular, a person, but something that's really helped you navigate that creativity or passion.
I would say that this goes back to Marcus. There's a US author called Ryan Holiday who wrote a book called Ego is the Enemy.
Yes.
And this book is just sort of for anybody out there that's interested in, again, how to be a better person, how to be a better version of yourself. This book looks at something which is really quite common in the music industry, this idea of ego, but we see it everywhere. And this book gives you some really great examples throughout history of ego and how it's got in people's way, and then how other people, and he mentions Marcus in there, along with other Stoic philosophers, but how some individuals that didn't have to do this looked at themselves and went, actually, if I get rid of this ego bit, I can actually become a better version of myself. And it's an incredibly practical guide to help live a better life.
It's an incredible book. And yeah, ego in the music industry, that's prevalent, in the entertainment industry. What?
I was shocked.
Interestingly, you made a very, very good point. If we can get the ego out of the way from making the decisions, which feeds a lot of times into the emotions, the output and the outcomes that we desire are far more positive than not. But I think also sometimes it's that people don't necessarily even realize that they are making decisions from ego. Oh, well, I'm just passionate. I'm like, I think you're in your emotions, and we could talk about that if you want, and I think that the space has to also be very, clear for people to feel that, like, I hadn't really thought about that. And like, yeah, what do you really want in this situation, versus kind of operating from a collective ego a lot of times, right? So, which I think we'll probably get into when we talk a little bit about mental health. But amazing. Thank you for the rapid fire questions. For the audience, you have a lot of background experience. I would love for you you can dive in at any point in your story that you want, or go as far back as you want. But I would love for the audience to get to know the context more of some of the things we're going to be talking about, because you've been doing some things for a little while, and I would love for you to share with the audience so we can get into it. You can go as far back as you want, but how did we get here how did you get into all of these different things?
Right. So I guess maybe starting at the beginning. I used to do club promotion stuff when I was at college, university. And then I go out and spend seasons in Ibiza, and I work on the island for like sort of the 4 or 5 months from May to September, which is like the Ibiza season. And I found myself working in the club, so I started to get into lighting, understanding sort of like the technical side of things, doing some VJing, and I'd find myself in like a palm tree in Pasha, doing the video for Underwater, Darren Emerson's night, and all of these great DJs from around the world, through to working in places like Manumission, where I became a laser technician, which was it was a thing back then. We're talking about like 2000.
Right.
Lighting's advanced a lot since, but then it was like a thing. This massive laser run off a bucket of water. It was proper Heath Robinson stuff. And you had 12,000 people. It's in a club called Privilege, a night called Manumission, which has now stopped. But Privilege, I think, is still maybe one of the world's biggest. It was at the time the world's biggest club by the Guinness Book of Records. So 12,000 people in there. There's a plane hanging from the ceiling. There's people jumping from the roof on bits of silk, and performers everywhere. It's a real sort of theatrical production. But people would come up to me, and they've had a few drinks, whatever, and they'd ask for a lighter. I'm there, I'm in a prominent position, operating this laser, and I'd take their cigarette and I'd put it to the laser, and it would catch fire, and I'd hand it back to them. And the expression on these people's faces was just like one of complete bewilderment and surprise. So that was like my little sort of like party piece back then. But that was really in the thick of the island, when it was, I guess, quite an organic place. Club culture was really starting to still form. It wasn't in the same professional sense that we now have today. And I guess I use that as a touchstone for where I am today, working for the Association for Electronic Music, which is a global trade association to represent the interests of people, organizations working within electronic music. That didn't exist back then. It was still very, very organic. People were finding their feet. Labels like Defected, which are obviously massive global names now, but was sort of like 3 or 4 years old at the time. So imprints that we're now really familiar with we're just being born, and the industry's gone through a lot since then. We've gone through a lot of changes and a lot of evolution. It's become very professional. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's now global. It touches pretty much every corner of the world, and that's been a really exciting journey to be on. And now getting to do what I do in my current role, I get to touch on all of those different sort of points of work.
Yeah, expand on that a little bit. Like, what in your current role, what are some of the things that you're leading up right now?
So we have several different working groups. There's 7 active working groups in AFM, Association for Electronic Music, and they look at specific areas, Matt, within the culture that are important. Sort of like have very topical issues like diversity and inclusion, mental health, and the environment, right through to the commercial side. And you and I were talking a little bit about sort of touching on the rights management side of things earlier. We have a group that looks at anti-piracy, looks at the performing rights side of things. So really, taking care of the commercial side of the industry's interests, and then a host of things in between.
You guys have your hands full.
We're pretty busy.
Yeah, I mean, and we can dive into really any area of that, and I'd like to, but you've been around this for quite some time, and so you've actually really seen a genre evolve and go through, phases and go through times in our history already. You know what I mean? And I mean, how is the overall state of the industry progressing right now? Like, what are some of the top concerns that either concerns or even, you know, progressive ideologies? I mean, like, and I guess as an example, because, you know, we were talking before the show, you know, and you can, by the way, you can touch on anti-piracy, because I would love to get your take, because for everybody listening, we were talking about the days of Napster, and how I wasn't necessarily for the piracy aspect, but that you could kind of see that artists that weren't known yet were wanting to become more well known by having the people have the music, and then we share, and then we communicate online. And now I think we're starting to move more into this kind of arena where artists, fans connect, you know. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about like the piracy as well, but like also, what do you think is most attractive to artists more than ever right now as the industry constantly evolves?
It's a great question. I mean, I think in terms of piracy, we've come from a place where there was an opportunity right at the beginning of the 2000s, like we were saying, where there were some companies that were emerging, that were really in a great position to take advantage of this new online format, and it wasn't embraced by the big label at the time, unfortunately, and they kind of missed the boat on that one, dropped the ball, and we saw piracy emerge from that. Because, as we know, whenever there's a void of demand, people will fill it, and it was filled by, in that case, pirates. So rights holders, people that own record labels, that have tracks and records and albums that are theirs, didn't see any income that came from that, unfortunately. But since then, we've obviously seen a shift to streaming. Now, that's addressed the piracy issue in a pretty big way, where you've suddenly got music which is affordable, and can be streamed in high quality to any device anywhere around the world. It's really diminished, to a large extent, the demand for piracy, or the need for piracy, certainly in the West, in North America and in Europe. We've seen a drop in the rate of piracy use in those territories. It is still a thing, and it is still a thing worldwide. If you've got promos going out, it's the absolute bugbear of record labels, where people are ripping promos and then putting stuff online early, because it really upsets the whole promotion of that new release that somebody's worked so hard on. It's an entire team of people that sit behind the making of a track, and it takes a long time. So that still happens, and that is still a thing, but it is certainly diminishing. And we're seeing, thankfully, now rights holders get much more fairly rewarded for the music that they're making, and they have the channels to put it out there. You've got lots of different mediums to put it out there, from things like Tracksource and Beatports through to your sort of big iTunes and Deezer and places like that, where you can get the music out, and rights holders are seeing an income from that.
I mean, the barriers to distribution have come down. So, well, first of all, I love, if there's a void, people will fill it. That's a great line. If there's a void, people will fill it. And it's true. And sometimes, a lot of times, the audience, right. Your case, Pirates, I get what you were saying, though, for sure. Like, Pirates came in like, let's go ahead and put this and see what happens, And as you also made another really great point, music became more affordable. And I feel like the barrier to entry of, I can buy one track, or I can have a Spotify subscription, and I can interact with the artists on social media. I know exactly when a track comes out. I can follow along on their journey. I mean, the whole landscape really changed, right?
It changed completely. And from when I was a kid and I was going out and buying 12 inches, and you go and get a 12-inch, and you spent like, what at the time that was like £7 or £8, which is maybe like sort of $10, $12, and that was standard, and you pay maybe $10, $15, $20 for a record without really thinking about it. And now I can download something from Tracksource or Beatport. I still play off stick, so I can download that track for a couple of bucks, and then stick it into my CDJs, and I'm playing straight away. And you've now, sort of probably somewhere sat in the middle with that. You've got this expansion into being able to stream directly to your deck, so you can actually take music and you can stream directly to the decks. And as Wi-Fi improves and those signals get stronger, then we'll probably see an increasing shift in that way. Personally, I'm still about the stick because I like it. That's made music very accessible. You don't have to have incredibly expensive record collections to be able to play out. You can access that music really easily. It's really portable. You can take it wherever you want to. And I'm sure there's a lot of DJs out there that I was having a chat to one the other day, actually, here in London, and we're just talking about like the physical pain that carrying vinyl was caused. Like vinyl's still an amazing medium, but if you're going and playing several gigs a night and you've got 100 records or more over your shoulder, it's doing some fairly interesting things for your spine. So that accessibility in terms of the consumer side has really improved. But then, Matt, you also touched on this idea of distribution. We have fantastic distributors now that have routes to market worldwide that can get music from people that maybe wouldn't have had the opportunity to have that exposure, which is maybe like helping to democratize music a little bit. It's becoming more of a meritocracy where if you're making good music and you can get it into the right hands, because you're going to try, you're going to find that record label, you're going to find that distributor, you're going to put it in the right person's hands. You can be from a small town that no one's heard of and still have a big record. You don't need to be living in New York or LA or London or Amsterdam, wherever it might be. So that it feels like our community, the electronic music community that sits alongside the industry, has been brought together more by those changes.
I mean, community must be drastically expanding in a socially digital world, not just with the likes of like Instagram. I don't really put TikTok on there, but I probably should. I might get people might not like me for saying that, but I mean like Twitch is really, I was thinking more of like a Twitch or, live streaming platforms and things like that, where like everybody's coming together. Now, in every time you always have the people who, game the system, whether we like it or not. Piracy was just trying. I mean, there's a lot of like people look at that as the pros and cons of, well, we're trying to democratize music and get it out more to the masses without having the gatekeepers get in the way. So I get that. But then you have the other side of like people who kind of game the number of streams. It's so interesting. The amount of time sometimes I look at people taking to game a system. I'm like, you can put that exact same effort into like doing the right thing. But I mean, how is that? First of all, how is it that they are gaming streams? That's one area that I haven't dove into. That like, how are people pumping up numbers in streams? What is it that they're even doing in the first place?
Well, I think it's worth contextualizing the whole thing of gaming as well. This isn't just something that's new to the digital age.
Right.
There are some record labels over the years, and some DJs and some artists and some people through the times, when things were physical, have been known to jump on scooters or vans, and on the release date of that particular track, go and buy up all of the tracks in given record stores. And it hit multiple cities. Around the place and do those things. So there's always been a bit of that. I think that the shift now is that you have more commercially based vendors that are doing this at scale, and not that tended to be that wasn't that common, and it wasn't that big a thing. It happened, but it wasn't like maybe to the scale that we now see with people rigging the sort of the stream side of things. I don't know enough about that topic, Matt, to be honest with you, to comment on it authoritatively, because I think it's still, if you look at the service providers, it's not coming from them.
Right.
This is something that goes on by third parties that are working in the shadows. And as I say, I'm not authoritative enough to talk sort of expertly on that. But it is a thing. You're right.
Well, that was such a good analogy. You're right about, because that's been going on for a long time where, people will just go buy up all their own records and go, oh, okay, like here, I'm going to sell 100,000 copies in the first week. And they had, investment or their own money. And they would go in and buy it all. Like, hey, we got our numbers. And then they, climb to the charts. And then that would be almost like an investment to get everybody else to buy and get it up to 1 million, records. So they make their money back. Plus, they were hedging in a way, in a lot of ways. So that's actually one of the best analogies right there that you could give. So that was it was very helpful. And you're right. There's always people in the shadows.
Always people in the shadows. And it's, those people that operate in those spaces, it's often quite hard to do things about them. I guess from an AFM perspective, what we're always trying to do is to make sure those people that are within the industry are given the best platform and opportunity they can to succeed.
Well, and this leads me to a very good transition of what I want to talk to you about: mental health. Because where do you even begin on that category? You've got a lot of people who they see the stream numbers, whether they're accurate or not. They see the social media numbers. They see who's showing up for lives, who's showing up in the clubs. There's so many inputs to mess with a person that, obviously we want them to always stay in the mindset of, look, I love what I do. I want to play the music. I want to connect with the fans, whether it's 2 fans or 2,000 fans or 20,000 fans or whatever. But mental health issues are at an all-time high, because of a digital world. Do you cover some of these topics, or what areas of mental health are you guys most concerned about? What are you seeing? I mean, you can go on a tear. you can talk about anything, but I like talking about mental health because I think it's important for people to know that, they're not alone, and that everybody deals with some form of anxiety or depression, or whether small amount or massive or whatever. So what are some of the areas that you're passionate about in talking about this, or that you're noticing or you guys are tackling? Any place you want to jump in on that?
You nailed it just then, Matt, when you said that everybody often has some form of mental health experience. And that's true. Maybe it's quite low level and right through to things which are quite profound, but that this really affects everyone. And if it's not affecting you, there's every chance that you'll know somebody who it has impacted. And we've seen, again, this shift with the industry. Back where my story began, you'd put your record out and you'd hope it did well, and you'd maybe get some information back from your promo company. Oh, there's this floor reaction. Some people have bothered to fill out some paper forms and send them back, and we're gauging this, and then it goes on sale, and actually it's done quite well, or it hasn't, and then maybe from that you get some DJ gigs and you appear at a certain place on the billing, and you feel a bit upset because you're mid-tier and you want to be top. So there were all of those things, but it wasn't this pervasive 24/7 culture that we have through social media, which allows people to constantly compare themselves to not just the people in their social group, which is what it used to be. Those people in your immediate vicinity were your point of comparison. Now it's global, and it's often to people that you've never met, and it's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly in your pocket. Now, social media has given this amazing ability, as we all know, to connect and bring people together and talk about culture and the things we love. And that's fantastic. I think what's problematic and what we've experienced is that when people stop using social media as a tool, and it then becomes this almost avatar extension of themselves, where there's a value placed upon it that doesn't have parity, isn't in line with their lived experience, and then people can become quite vulnerable because actually they're living their life through something which isn't them. And these constant comparisons can be incredibly tiring and demoralizing. And if you see that the whole time, then that can have its own set of issues. So a big part of the work that we do with AFM, the health group, is to touch on that first point you made, which is to destigmatize the subject, to talk about it and say, hey, look, this is really common. And we've got more and more artists that are coming and talking about it now. We're just about to launch a new part on the AFM website, which is going to have stories from across the industry. So people like yourself, people who are sort of main stage artists, interns, people that are working backstage or just started out in the industry, and everyone in between. This idea that, as you were saying, that this affects everyone, but actually having that in a place where people can come and read those stories, and it's this really humanistic thing of, oh, okay, I can relate to that person, because not everyone can relate to the main stage artist. Maybe that's not quite their life of VIP cars and hotels and other things like that, but they can probably relate to somebody that's working in an office or that's having a similar time doing a similar job to them. So we're looking at that side. We always encourage people to sort of treat social media as a tool, come to it, but don't use it the whole time. It's not you. You're not your records that you sell. You're not the followers you've got or you don't have. You're none of those things. And we go back to talking about Marcus Aurelius. There was somebody that would say, you're not the empire. You're not these things that people tell you that you are. And if you listen to people that are poor flatterers and those that would wrong you in the same way, if you feel yourself getting puffed up by compliments that people give you on social media or directly, it makes you very vulnerable, because when somebody maybe slights you or criticizes you, that can be really cutting. Again, that point of ego. It's like the more we can subsume our ego and step away from that, the healthier we'll be.
Well, you bring up some incredible points, stoicism. It's the ability to not be affected, whether it's a good compliment or a bad criticism, to be very emotionally balanced. Thank you for the feedback. thank you for the feedback. But having an internal relationship with ourselves to know that I am not these things, but I am of public service. I am, releasing my work, to the world. And first of all, you guys ever have, you need more people to talk about this, whether in person or online. I'm there because it's been a fascinating ride. I talk to several 100,000 people a day online. It's been interesting learning along the way. Well, first of all, making the space safe for people to realize you're not your titles. Their titles are only placed on you because the world needs a way to identify what it is that you are doing. But that's not really success. That's just a particular role at any given time and in a phase of your life. And you also brought up a really great point about this, pervasive 24/7, culture, and people are really slapping on filters to no end of here's a curated piece of content, that looks like I'm in the beach, but I'm in my backyard on a little pile of sand or whatever it might be. And there's nothing wrong with being creative, where I think but when it becomes deceptive, or I think sometimes people just don't think about the fact that life is not perfect, and that's beautiful. You don't want it to be perfect because you want to grow, and growth comes from like knowing and understanding all the little things that are hiccups along the way. And social media has put this kind of on like, here's every beautiful curated moment. And I can tell you from being online, especially talking with other even bigger people online, oof, if everybody knew what I had heard from them, you would all be in shock. But out of respect to them, I'm like, no, the space is safe. Like, tell me what's going on. And they suffer it too. The big influencers suffer it sometimes the most, and artists especially too. We've seen even artists who, whether they've turned to certain substances, like in terms of the abusive side. I mean, obviously there's also like the non-abusive side of it, but from the abusive side, or having severe mental breakdowns and whatnot, and even in some cases taking their lives. So I think that not a lot of people are aware that everybody is going through something at some point given in time. And I love that you brought up again Marcus Aurelius. Yeah, it's that like, I am not this empire, So do you guys like continue to have open dialogue? Do artists come to you with these things, or do you guys start to see the signs on certain things, or do you, how do you continually advocate for this? Because I think it's something to be advocated for a while, especially during the times that we're living in.
Definitely. And we'd love to have your story on the page that we're going to create, and it's going to be open to the whole industry. So we'd love to have your views in there.
I'm on my way.
Thanks, man. To pick up on your point, and you sort of just touched in it in your like really brilliant synopsis of how this all comes together, or in some cases doesn't. That idea of when the partying becomes self-medication, right? There's this switch, and we've seen it with sadly artists like Keith Flint and Avicii over recent years,
Yes.
where to deal with the strain and the pressure of relentless touring, people turn to drink and drugs as a way to self-medicate and to address that. And it's not just obviously within a touring context. It can be because you're spending ages in the studio. It can be because actually working music can be quite lonely. You're not getting to see other people. You're working on sociable hours. You're doing multiple jobs because you're actually struggling to find a foothold in the industry. It's incredibly competitive. It's not always that well paid. It looks very glamorous at the top, but there's thousands of jobs that sit alongside it, that people are often doing something else, they're asking a second job to be able to do this other thing. And all of that is, it's a highly pressurized atmosphere, regardless of where you are. So that bit of sort of just like looking out for our friends, checking in on people, really common sense. And I know that a lot of people listening and watching this is, stuff they're really familiar with, but maybe there'll be a few people that have tuned in and it's kind of new to them. But actually just very openly asking the person that's next to you, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we do that the whole time, right? It's like, hey Matt, how you doing? And you're like, yeah, I'm great. And Tristan, like, I'm cool. Like just going past that and just double checking, just checking in, is everything really okay? And that just bringing some sincerity to things again, where we were talking about how people have this very stylized view of themselves that they present on social media because they think it's going to be liked. They think people are going to like it and buy into that. And when they don't, it can be incredibly upsetting. But the more that we can be authentic, the more that we can be our real selves, whether that's in the studio making music because you really care about that music, not because you're hoping a label will like it or a certain group of fans will get into it. And I know an artist who's a friend of mine, who was very successful, doing really well, and then he got involved in the whole EDM wave when that was sort of coming up in 2011, 12, and he'd been a very successful house DJ for many many years, and he tried to do the EDM thing because he thought it was going to be popular. And it was for a time, but it didn't work out for him. And this sense of inauthenticity and how disingenuous he felt, it really upset him and it upset his career. The benefit being it created a huge opportunity for self-development. He's grown massively as a
Mm.
result of that. But that realization, I think the earlier on we can have that actually whatever we're doing is authentic and it's for us. It's not hoping to get a pat on the back or a round of applause. And that if you make that music as an artist because you love it, you're going to keep loving that process, and it's going to be something that brings you joy, no matter whether you're earning money from it or not. If you can turn it into a career, that's phenomenal. And it's not an easy thing to do. If you get to that place, however you've done it, that's wonderful, and you're great about that. But not to have that expectation, just keeping a lightness to it, just enjoying that process. If it's not enjoyable, then you should, maybe think about just giving it a little rest, taking a pause, giving yourself some time. But this whole idea that we as a community have moved from a place of 20 years ago, great hedonism, very, very, very hedonistic time within in music, to a point sort of in between there where mental health still wasn't really spoken about, but the professionalism of the industry grew up. And then you had these companies emerging that turned into global brands that everyone knows, to a place now where I haven't been to or spoken at a single conference in the last 4 years that hasn't had mental health as top
Mm.
billing. This is a priority subject for each and every conference
My
and for all of the
God.
people that go there. And that's been a wonderful switch to see, to really destigmatize that subject, share the right information, and let people know that it's okay not to be okay.
That was gold. There's so much in that. I mean, the authenticity part is spot on, because there's layers of that. I never not thought about it because I think it was a natural communicator, good or bad, of whatever was going inside. But as you start to get on the stage a little bit, you start to realize there are different levels to where people feel comfortable being themselves or not being themselves, or even when they think they're being themselves, but they're not at all.
Right.
And it can be difficult. Like you brought up a good point about, checking on your friends. I have this thing where I ask twice. So say, hey, how you doing? Good. How are you doing though? Is the second follow-up. And,
Exactly.
because I know you're doing well for the most part. For the most part, I can see that. But like, how are you feeling in this marathon we call life? Because I even know, even with a strong mental, capacity, you brought up the point about it can be very lonely. Creating can be very lonely, while I have several people I work with that help me in a lot of this stuff, but like I'm curating a lot. I'm editing. I'm, working on this initiative, on this project, on and doing the work, I'm the janitor all the way up to the CEO, you know what I mean? And being sometimes so heavily immersed in the work is draining. It can be very lonely, and it can totally mess with your mind. Usually if I'm in motion though, I'm pretty good, because I like the creative aspect is the beautiful part, because it totally zones everything out, including your mind, your monkey mind that's messing with you. But it can be very lonely. And I think a lot of people don't see that. They just see maybe the artist or the person or the public figure and they go, wow, like I want their life. I'm like, do you have any clue what is going on behind the scenes with it? And I think it should be, to your point on the authenticity, I'm going to do it in front of you guys. So A, I'm not technically alone, but B, so you can also see the process, so you can also see what's going into it. Let's jam on this together, and have that authenticity to be like, I'm going to show you the unfinished product while I'm building it. I'm going to show you what it looks like while I'm learning it. And may you have grace on me in the process, as well as learn something about you in the process, So, right?
Definitely. And you've just shared sort of like a little insight about the polished show that you have, and this image of the show, which is really together, it's super professional, and you've got these amazing people that come on here. And then you've just been like, well, I'm the janitor, I have to like sweep up and like look after stuff, right, the way through to making the big decisions about where we're going to go. Well, what kind of things do you do to look after yourself in those situations?
You know, Wow, somebody hasn't actually asked me on the reverse on the show yet. But there's a few different things that I do. I definitely have a couple of morning routines that really ground me. I've made a lot more boundaries as to when I will do work, because like I love working, I love creating, but that too can be a self-medicating addiction. People don't realize like really working is, well, yeah, because
Right.
if it comes at the cost of maybe eating when you should be eating and working out when you should be working out and doing other activities, yeah, actually it can be, and creating all that stress and cortisol. Actually, stress is like the number one killer, period. It creates and manifests everything else, so I had to learn boundaries. I had to learn to do like sometimes 90-minute sprints with work, where I'll go in for 90 minutes and then I'll get up for about 10 or 20 minutes. I'll either do a walk, I'll do a breath work session, maybe a quick calm app meditation, whatever that might be. Movement in the morning, get breathe the fresh air, ground. I'll walk sometimes on the grass, just to kind of have my feet to the ground. All these little things that like not only remind me how good things really are, the real perspective of like, wow, like actually, wait, life is really good. Like, enjoy this, enjoy the process, Like, don't be in a rush to be anywhere. It also makes me very, very present. So for me, from getting burnt out years ago, that's what led me into being like, this is not sustainable. This level of work, while I love the work, is not necessarily lifelong sustainable. And so I wanted to better understand what the process is, and not just the process in work, but the process in who you are and who you're becoming. And yeah, so the reading and the hiking and the working out and the nutrition and the cooking and like all of these different things that pull me up out of just one area and make me take care of myself, also speed up a lot of other things in my life. So because I hadn't thought about the fact that when we can slow down and get very present and get very clear, we also start to get rid of things that don't serve us. And then we start to think about the things that do, and how can we do more of that. And then also, anytime I've gotten really, really burnt out from the creative aspect and the work of it, a quick trip, like you said, just maybe stop for a moment of what you're doing. Whether for some people it's a few months or a year, other people, for me, might be a week or a few days or whatever, depending on where you're at in the process of what you're building. But that 30,000 foot view is so important. I could be stuck on something trying to force an answer. I go on like a weekend long trip or week long trip, and I'll be in the middle of something having fun. I'm like, oh my God, like, like I got the answer. We have to remove ourselves often from the thing that we're trying to figure out to actually figure it out, right?
Definitely. And that routine's amazing, Matt. Like, that's the advice you just shared there is very much the sort of advice that we would share or advocate. Your routine's we have similar routines.
Yeah.
And that idea of being anchored to something that is
Yes.
non-screen based, that, however you start your day, have something that's yours, so something that you're not instantly, and this is obviously what an awful lot of people do. I used to be one of them. I would reach for my phone as a reflex
Yes.
habitually the moment I became conscious. And it's kind of ironic because you're making yourself unconscious by being absorbed into the screen, but you pick up your phone or laptop or tablet, and then you're straight away in this reactive sway of this world. Whereas if you put a stop in there, for me, that's like an hour and a half, first hour and a half of the day. It's like really nutritious breakfast. I go for a walk outside, again, just to be outdoors, come back, and then I do some creative writing, and then I make my list of to-dos for the day. And then when I'm set,
Yes.
then I throw some there's a bit of yoga and stretching and stuff in there as well. But when I've done that physical bit, that mental bit, that's for me, and I feel calm and centered, then I'll turn on my devices and dive into that world. And you talked quite a bit there about sort of peppering your day or your
Yes.
working world with these stops, doing 90-minute sprint, having some time, going for a walk or whatever it might be. Even as you rightly said, you're really caught up and you love what you're doing, it can end up feeling overwhelming or exhausting, and you can end up feeling burnt out at the end of it if you don't put those breaks in. So I was talking to a sort of artist manager of some really big talent we all know really well recently, and they were saying about how some of their artists before the pandemic hit were just starting to book in this crazy thing called a holiday, which a lot of artists they just tour 365 days a year, because you can now play at parties and festivals and clubs worldwide, and you get to a certain level, obviously, as we all know, like all year long, and they're going, well, hang on, actually, I'm doing really well. I'm getting paid well for what I do. I can afford to take 3 or 4 weeks off each year, and yeah, I'll miss out on some gigs and things, but hey, that probably just makes me more popular because I'm more in demand, and I get some time to rejuvenate. And I think with the industry where we are, it's become so full throttle and so busy, and we're looking forward to it getting back to that place, in terms of events reopening worldwide and getting the touring back on, getting the events clubs, everything going again, and all of the ancillary parts of our organization, of our industry that support the live side, getting back up to full speed. But that hopefully there's a time a bit further down the line when we are back up to full speed, where people just start to be mindful of the things that you just shared there and go, how can I make this really sustainable, like for me and for other people
Yes.
around? Maybe building in those breaks and giving myself a little bit of time is a good thing to do.
Peace is such a luxury.
Mm.
It is such an understated luxury. And, you're right. The morning routines are everything: movement, mobility, gratitude, prayer, nutrition, walking, all of these things. And what was a really big game changer for me years ago, I heard Dr. Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza? Right. I figured you would be. I mean, for anybody listening, a lot of like everything from, breath work and mindfulness to metaphysics and quantum mechanics. And he said something really that hit me very hard. And it was just so simple. I love when people take high concepts and just be like, let's just put it in English. Let's just put it in very simplistic terms. And
Right.
he said that when you wake up, if you go right into work, you're basically going into work with your body on memory and your mind on memory of everything up until that day. So you're actually going right into a wheel based on your past. So you're actually, in a weird way, living in your past because it's actually controlling your present. You haven't had any moment of downtime yet to assess where you're at. You get up, and what helps drive you is the cellular memory of yesterday and every day until then, right? To like do the work or do your life.
Right.
If you wake up earlier and take a moment and reflect and do meditation and think about like, where are you? What's not working? What is? Where would you like to go? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? All of these different things. What starts to happen is you calm the nervous system like drastically, but B, like having that time to sit with yourself allows you to make, in a present state, future decisions easier that align you with where you would like to head, because you've like reset and recalibrated your whole like nervous system. It's like you're basically learning what you would like to like drive the car, the body, in this case, the person, right? Yourself. And now you're actually forward moving. So that way it's like when you're so grounded, things come at you all day like, hey, can you do this? No. Yes, no, yes. Because like you know what fits in and what doesn't. So you're able to make clearer decisions based on a future that you're creating while being very present and not making decisions from your past. And he said it even simpler than that, but it was very impactful to think about of like, oh, wow. And the beautiful irony. So you're saying I come first before everybody else because a better me is a better way I can show up in the world. But, sometimes people like, well, isn't that selfish? I'm like, well, it's the good selfish where you have to fill your own cup. You have to constantly, be dialed in for you first, or, a depleted version of you can't continue the work to help others. Right.
100%. I mean, I love that whole idea, and that again, the idea of being present that you touched on, that enables us to make better decisions about what our future selves might want or need, and so we set stuff up today that's going to be beneficial for them there. And the other point that you touched on about it almost sounding like a little bit selfish to take care of yourself first. Well, we talk about this in the mental health space quite regularly. This idea of put your mask on first. If you're on a plane, they always talk about if you're with a child that you put your mask on before you put the child's mask on,
Yes.
so you can function and operate and actually help out other people. You can't do that if yourself you're not in a great place, or you're struggling. So if the more we can do to prevent ourselves from getting to that place in the first instance, the more we can do to help ourselves, the better the future we'll have, and then also the more we can do to help others.
Yeah, and so whenever someone says, "Oh, isn't that selfish?" I'm like, "Be selfish."
Selfish.
Yeah, and just like grounding yourself and understanding who you are more in this world, creating a higher EQ, emotional quotient, and understanding and sitting with your emotions, being able to actually lean into them, like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. I'm not sure why, but I want to understand why. In order to understand why, I have to sit with myself, which goes back to your point of authenticity. Like, I can't ask for help or even remotely make the kind of changes I want unless I actually sit with myself for a minute and be like, what do I need though? Like, what is actually happening with me in my world that isn't aligning, so I can make the appropriate next step, not the end step, just the next step. And I think that's why sitting with ourselves and our emotions, so long as we don't sit in the emotions for too long. I mean, there's, I think, also that part where we can get a little carried away, because the goal is more so to have a better understanding of who we are so we can, move through it.
You're absolutely right. There's a difference, isn't there, between ruminating and sort of stewing in your own thinking and actually being mindful of it, and watching, in a meditative way, watch those thoughts pass by rather than getting caught up in them. But then also really being authentic to yourself about what it is that you want, and then focusing on those goals and working forward to make those happen.
Do you feel like, and this will kind of also help transition a little bit, do you feel like it's much more being talked about, it's much more accepted, like, hey, I need a break, hey, here's how I'm feeling, hey, like, I'm trying to do what's best for me, I'm trying to do what's best for the art that I love so much, and which kind of, I was gonna say, leads into a little bit of like this idea of like more ownership of who we are and ownership of our content and our art. But are you feeling like it's definitely shifting in that direction?
Massively. I've just finished a few weeks back doing a mental health first aid course, so there's an organization, I'll send the links and hopefully we can pop them in the sort of
Absolutely.
chat so people can see these, check them out. But this course enables you to have the skills to not only take care of yourself, but then also other people as well. And the great thing, Matt, on this course, like, there's probably a few faces you would have known on there, some really well-known artist managers and people from the live sector, from clubs, from record labels, that were giving up their time to get trained in the same way that people have done for years and years and years in physical first aid. Every office has a physical first aider. It's just standard. You don't think about it, and maybe there'll be people watching this that are physical first aiders, but that now we have mental health first aiders where you can get given the tools to triage a situation and help somebody that's maybe going through something, and that people can know that there's a designated person within a company. And in our sense, we're talking about festivals or clubs or record labels or distributors, that there's somebody there, whether it's backstage at a live event or it's in an office somewhere in the city, that they can go and talk to and have those conversations. That's incredibly empowering, and it's a big part of AFN's work. We've been sort of championing this idea for some years, that trying to get as many of our industry trained in mental health first aid as possible. One of our chairs, Ben Turner, just recently got trained himself, and you're seeing people like that who are industry veterans at a very high level, that have worked in the industry for a long time. They're doing it. This is something that everyone is now getting involved in, and we hope that sort of in the years to come, not too far in the future, this will be just a standard practice in the same way that physical first health is already.
And I feel like, because of tackling mental wellness, it also helps tackle, like, well, what's leading to that? What's leading to any of the issues? And that also helps shape industries, changes and ideologies and business models. I mean, because a lot of times I think that the artist, yes, is having some troubles from, like, a lot of the other things that we talked about in relation to, from social to numbers they're producing, to, get more numbers, to, beat the last album, all this other stuff. So industry's role a lot of times has to also look at itself and be like, how am I doing? Like, in relation to, so you guys have you have a sector in the organization dedicated to this, but I wonder how many other, like, labels or businesses are actually asking themselves, like, am I the problem? I mean, like, to my beautiful artists over here, like, I want what's good for them just the same, and they're feeling pressure. Am I feeling pressure in some way? And am I putting this pressure on them as well? Like, where am I in relation to the totality of everything, which probably goes into a much larger conversation of the entire world right now. It's like and the reason I ask that is because I remember being in a lot of different situations, both good and bad outcomes. But outcomes, let's just say focus for the bad outcomes. There are certain things that even when I thought I had done everything right, I still had to learn, but I ended up with an outcome I didn't like. Where am I responsible for the decisions that I made that this happened? And that's what got me to constantly think to myself, who am I in relation to what I'm experiencing, and how is that affecting anybody else? Right. And so that's why I was asking, like, do you think industry, we can talk about a lot of like, hey, here's some really great things that have helped. But really for me, it was, yeah, here's some great things that help me understand what kind of decisions I'm making and how that is not only affecting my world, but how it is also in relation to other people affecting them. Right.
It feels like it comes back to your point earlier about how not letting yesterday control our
Yeah.
today, having that break. And if we look at it from a industry systemic point of view, how do we prevent the years gone by from making us make maybe similar mistakes that we have done before, which potentially is now being much more aware of the hours that we do, the asks that we're making of people, whether that's an artist touring, because it's not just the artist touring, they've got their tour manager, they've got their support team, they've got their agents and everybody else that sat around that, as an example. But saying, well, what's it like if we just throttle back a little bit here in terms of these hours that we keep, how we're checking in with people, the time and capacity we're giving them, the support that we're giving them, the resources, that is definitely changing. And you hear that, not just that conversation, you see that result, the action, right? In terms of people going and doing these courses where they're learning skills which they can use to help themselves and to help other people as well. And this understanding that actually, if we want to have a sustainable, electronic music industry for many more years to come, that these are things that we need to do. And you're definitely starting to see those shifts take place.
Mm. I mean, and in that manner, I feel like, and it's such an incredible time because it's also coming at a time where the advancement in music technology, where, I feel like not only do people spiritually want to take back control of, their being in this world, but also of their art. And I know that sometimes, that's scary to industries, because it's like, wait, no, you need us. I'm like, that's actually a codependency issue. Like if we're really going, humanistic on everybody, but it's good. I think advancement of technology, depending on how it's used, is really, really good in the fact that, like, if a person is going to want to start taking more accountability and responsibility for their life, that is going to include their work and their art.
100%.
100%, right? And so I feel like that's why sometimes the spiritual and emotional combines the business and the technology, and artists saying like, look, I need to break free from this contract, or look, I like our relationship, I just need to do some things differently because this technology allows me to do this now, and have like more, look, I was meeting with the accountant and I'm realizing some things, and this radical accountability and transparency that we're living through, we have to allow it. I mean, I'm not really industry, so I guess it's easy for me to say I'm an independent always, but for a lot of industry people, you have to allow it because that's actually the advancement of the music, of the art, of the technology, and it's good for mankind, whether somebody is okay with that or not,
Absolutely. And at that point, Matt, I think with technology sort of changing things, we've seen that in a really common way that everyone's pretty much been touched on by, like, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, how through the pandemic, we've seen the shift where people have had to work from home and that it's worked. And that suddenly you've got all of these big businesses, whether they're record labels or distributors, whoever it might be, big DSPs, like Spotify, Deezer, Facebook, all of these people, they've been operating really well. Nothing's changed, but this new dynamic of people having a better work-life balance where they're working from home, they've got more time with their family, they've got less stress because they're not commuting. This might be something, and I'm pretty sure it will be, that we'll see moving on when we put the pandemic behind us and we're sort of back into whatever the new normal looks like for our industry, that actually there's going to be a greater level of trust. There's going to be a greater level of appreciation for this value of this time where people can work from home. You don't need to be in the office the whole time. Come in a couple of days a week. People often love that, to be with your teammates and stuff. It's fun and it's exciting. And there's always going to be a couple of meetings here and there, which, kind of need to be in a space with people. But actually the rest of it, hey, do you know what? You don't need to commute. You can stay at home, keep on doing what you're doing it really well. Those things feels like, it's quite a sort of everyday thing that's maybe not specific to our industry. It touches everyone, but actually that's quite a big game changer, because then suddenly you've got more time for your friends and family, for your children, if you have kids, to go and do the things that you want to go and do, to take that walk. You don't feel, I'm not commuting an hour each end of the day. I can definitely stick, half-hour walk at the beginning of my day and at the end of my day, where I'm just, if you have access to parks and woods and stuff out in nature, but that actually there's this really lovely domino effect that tears down onto all of the other jobs and things from that ability to have that extra time. So I guess that's one example of where technology is going to hopefully affect all of us in a really positive way.
Yeah, well, and grounding in self creates innovative thinking. Innovative thinking creates new paradigms to do things, and then and then because of circumstances that put people into massive pivots over the last year and a half, it's also allowed a lot of adaptation of newer concepts, or creation and adaptation of newer concepts, like streaming TV, or like NFTs, and like blockchain, or like all these different things that allow artists to be like, how do I better understand myself and use this time appropriately, and how do I better communicate and create community within my fans and supporters? So and then technology comes in and plays a massive role with that. And so I think it's a very good disruption, a pattern disrupt, if you will, for really where we're heading. And I think it's causing artists and all people in particular to take a lot more accountability for, hey, what do I really want and how am I really managing it? And
Definitely.
right. And the beauty is there's a lot of outlets to be able to do it, versus, back in the day, it was the gatekeepers, and that was pretty much it, Now you're like, there are no gatekeepers. So if we don't want them to be,
Right. And you touched on the idea of live streaming, that's going to carry across into the post-pandemic world, where we're going to see that manifesting and continue to be a sort of income and reach for people. And this idea, again, of sort of democratizing the industry, that you can actually come at it from wherever you might be in the world. You don't have to be in a metropolis or sort of at the heart of things to be able to go and engage, that you can reach out from further afield, and that there are, like you touched on with NFTs, we just did an AFM podcast on it, looking at sort of the opportunities that sit around that for artists at lots of different levels. We're maybe where we were with blockchain, sort of like several years back, in terms of NFTs are still quite new. There's a huge amount of opportunity. How do we monetize that in a way that is, fair and equitable? And again, making sure that there's that wealth and spread, that it's not just concentrated in one place. I feel that it's really important. But you're right, that there's so many more opportunities now for people to thrive and flourish. And a lot of those opportunities come from, actually just taking your foot off the gas. It can be very easy to think that actually I must be creating the whole time in order to move forward, when actually there's a bit of neurology looking at sort of the brain, where, and I forget the term for it, but when we actually step back, neuroscience has shown that there's a part of the brain that processes things in the unconscious. It only happens when we step back from the task, and that processing, like you were talking about, maybe the things that have come during the sort of pause that we've had over the last year and a bit, is incredibly valuable. That's when you can have those breakthroughs. That's when you can have those discoveries. People often find it first thing in the morning, they've gone to bed like desperately trying to sort out this problem, and they just couldn't, and they go to sleep, and they wake up and often are like, I've got it right, and that it's that same bit of thinking. That's what's happened in those spaces. So this idea that we can value downtime as much as we can value, time in the studio, or time at the computer, or time playing out, it feels really important for a lot of different reasons.
So well put. That downtime is a massive upgrade for the uptime, you know. And I
Right.
think that that's, and it's a sometimes a weird concept. People are like, what do you mean I have to like stop to expand? You know, and I'm like, well, yeah, you know, pretty much. I mean, that's at least what I've noticed. But you're right. Once you start bringing the neuroscience of it, of like, well, because the conscious and even in some cases subconscious is able to like start processing differently versus being in it. Sometimes you're too far in it that you can't fully see the scope. I mean, focus is great for a particular task, but you know, so is going macro. You don't always have to be just so meta, you know, or micro, I should say. Sorry, not meta, micro. So it's there's a time and place for both, and I think that when they're both embraced, they're a beautiful relationship, you know. So
And it's something that's been around for so long. You know, like we talked about stoicism earlier.
yeah.
There's brilliant the Tao Te Ching, where it's a very old spiritual text, which is, you know, full of sort of beauty and simplicity. But there's this idea of wei wu wei, which is like translates as doing without doing. That we can actually do and achieve a lot simply by taking ourselves out of the fray, out of the action, and just being. And that thoughts will arise, ideas will come to mind, and we regenerate in that time to come back fresher to whatever it was
Hmm.
that we were doing before.
So true, and really, our authenticity is expanded from there, you know, because we actually have more of a relationship with our knowing at that moment, like, oh, and then and having that is really interesting, because then is like, then as the world does come at you, you're able to go like, no. Like, I mean, I respect you and I appreciate that, but no, like, I actually know, I know what's right for me in this given instant, versus constantly pushing ourselves into the chaos, if you will. You know. um Amazing. If Marcus Aurelius were around today, and he were to come speak at you know, your guys' organization, what do you think would be the first thing you would have him address?
That's a great question.
That's a random question. I just figured. I was just, because speaking of Marcus Aurelius, I mean, what a great person you brought up. I mean, there's just so much to be learned in the history of his leadership, especially when you think about when you're taught by like philosophers, but then you're also taught by warriors, and then you're taught by nobles, and you're taught by, I mean, you're able to think and defend and, you know, honor and respect. I mean, is a noble dude, you know, in history. So if he were here today, what do you think would be like a great topic that he would probably lead with and talking, you know, as a guest to your organization?
I think you might come in with this idea of reflection. So, like you touched
Mm.
on Meditations earlier, which is one of my favorite books. Meditations was never designed for public viewing, right? So it's come down through history, 2,000 years old. And we're lucky enough that copies survived and we can read it today. And it's in like sort of gem-like lucidity, beautiful English. You can read it now. It doesn't feel 2,000 years old. But this was just a collection of notes that the guy wrote to himself, right, to tell himself to be a better person. You know, to tell himself not to get stressed and caught up by life's events. You know, this idea of, he said, you're only harmed if you decide to be harmed. If you choose not to be harmed, then you're not. And that kind of feels like it touches on the social media thing that we were talking about earlier. That maybe Marcus would say, hey, look, guys, I see what you're doing, and I see this amazing creativity that exists and this camaraderie and bond that you will have. But just check in with yourself. Why are you doing what you're doing? Does this make you happy? The Stoics had this idea of tranquility as being sort of like the highest good. You know, is this bringing you to a place that gives you peace, that brings you joy? Not necessarily happiness, because it's quite a transient thing, you know, it's quite fleeting. But this idea of joy, just like tranquility and joy, which is a state that we can live in the more we work at these other things, where we don't allow ourselves to be harmed by the comment that somebody's left on social media, or the like we didn't get, or whatever it could be. So I think you'd probably come at it from a very simple angle, and maybe take that approach.
Perfect. So well said. Peace is a luxury. I'm telling you. Yeah. But to check in with yourself, why are you really doing what you're doing? And is there really a love there? Amazing. What do you guys have coming up? Anything you're excited about? Well, everything, but I mean, what do you guys have going up?
We are. I mean, there's great news in terms of the future of the live industry. You know, we've had a bit of a pause here in the UK, which has been a bit of a setback. Not to put too fine a point on it, it's been a very very tough time for people within in the live music industry. But we're excited about sort of the future coming out of that, and what that looks like for our community. as I say, we're a not-for-profit trade organisation, but we're a charity essentially. And the members we represent, it's about making sure that their interests are put forward and they can develop. And one of the places that often happens is conferences. So we have the Amsterdam dance event that's coming up in October of this year, which is going to be it's a major conference on the calendar. So we've got some sort of really exciting things planned there. We bring our groups together and talk with people in that forum. We've got the Electronic Music Inclusion Collective initiative, which is going at the moment, which we've done with a company called In Chorus. And this is basically a way for, it's a tool that companies can employ to share with their staff from a diversity inclusion point of view, to make sure that they're happy and safe. So they can check in if there's been microaggressions or issues and things like that, right the way through to bigger bits of harassment. They can check in completely confidentially and just let their sort of senior management team know how things are going. Which, to your point earlier, is like, what's the structural stuff that we can do as an industry to make things happen, change? That's feeding into that change. So companies can actually be really informed about what they can do better to make sure that their employees and staff are happier, healthier people.
I like that approach in terms of, let's just open up the dialogue to understand what is happening in any given moment. Versus, I think, we won't go on any kind of tear there, but like versus a lot of times I think people say, oh, this is how it is. And you're all gonna, you're all must be experiencing it too. And that's it. And you're like, well, no, I think it's always about creating the space to open up conversations and be like, what are you feeling? Like, just, did something happen? Like, what are you feeling? Like, let's talk about it. And let's look at it, like, a little bit more and have that beautiful open discourse. So that way, you feel seen, felt, and heard. And I think that putting that kind of structure into place is a world of help for moving forward in a lot of different ways where, it's just saying to people like, listen, like, we're all on this planet together. We all got to, love on each other together. We also have to love on ourselves, and we have to be able to talk about what, if something comes up, at least being in a space to have that kind of conversation of like, hey, this came up. I don't know what it means. So I'm trying to understand it. And I'm hoping that you as an organization can help me understand it. Is it me? Is it them? Is it the situation? What can I do better? I don't think you can go wrong when we do it that way. But to your point earlier, when I think sometimes the ego comes into place, being able to open up the discussion about a lot of things is sometimes not easy, because at any given point in time, someone's ego can maybe get in the way and be like, what? No, I didn't mean that. I didn't this, I didn't that. And it's like, so let's talk, let's work through it. And maybe there's like layers that we get to both like experience something together,
Definitely.
So yeah, incredible. Where can everybody find out about you, what you guys are doing, anything that you have coming up online, any of the websites, anything you want to give? I know, and you'll also, whatever you give us to, we'll make sure to put it in the show notes as well. But where are different ways people can find out about you guys online?
So the site is afemorg.net, and that's got everything about the Association for Electronic Music. It's got all of our different initiatives covering diversity and inclusion, sustainability, mental health, all of the things we talked about today, rights and royalties. And we're on all the socials. So it's just Association for Electronic Music if you're on Facebook, AFEM, or Association for Electronic Music on Insta, and on LinkedIn as well. And we have regular updates in our news section on there about what we're doing. If people would like to get in touch, I'll give my email. It's my name. It's Tristan, Tristan, at afemorg.net. And there's also contact points across all of our different socials and sites as well.
And then there's the man right there on social. If anybody wants to reach out to him directly. Hope I didn't just mess with you by sending everybody there. But really, really appreciate that. And having these conversations and being on today, and so massively important that, we tap into the tools, tap into the people, tap into the organizations, so we can just take back this personal, world of ours that we're trying to cultivate and nurture along the way. Because the marathon is the marathon. It is not a sprint. There are times that feel like a sprint, but it's a marathon. And so having, organizations such as the Association for Electronic Music, and really what you guys are doing is incredible. And just taking those initiatives to be to create that kind of level of listen, how can we help? We're trying to be publicly of service. How can we help? It's phenomenal that you guys are doing that. And so I give you a lot of credit. And happy to help out in any way, shape, or form, especially on these topics, especially if it helps the masses, because we got a little bit of work to do, so.
Appreciate it, Matt. Thank you so much for giving these topics that time and for giving the chance to sort of talk about our work today.
Absolutely. Thank you again for coming on. And for everybody listening, Tristan Hunt, you can go look him on Instagram, Tristan Hunt UK. You can look at Association for Electronic Music on Instagram, or you can go to associationforelectronicmusic.org and you can learn more about the association there. tristanhunt.co.uk if you guys want to reach out to Tristan there. And, just truly appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in into the growth, into the ratings and the reviews. We love the feedback. Please continue to have it coming in. Even though Tristan and I here, we're talking about, numbers and things like that. Do they matter? No, because we love our why. We love why we're doing this, but we do love the fact that people give us feedback, and apparently Apple does too. So we always ask people to do that. And then, you can follow us on all major platforms at We Are Orlove and at Matt Gottesman if you want to reach out to me. As some of you are learning, or some of you that may have already known, I answer each and every single DM, text, reply, response for like the last 8 years because of community, the importance of being able to connect and hear you guys out just the same. Like, we're really all in this together. And if you are listening to this on Apple or Spotify or Google Radio or iHeart or like 20 other platforms, you can actually also watch this interview on our Orlove YouTube channel. We launch these each week. And you can, comment there and join in the conversation there. We're very grateful for having you guys. We love you, and we're out.